Hello. In this next video on workflow, we're going to be focusing on creating a workflow task in Cobblestone Contract Insight. So first, we moved over to the Tasks tab, and I'm just going to click Add Task, and we'll get started. Before I do, let me just address two quick things. One, this is a pretty big page. There are a lot of settings here, so I'm really just going to focus on the important settings. I'll let you know which they are. There are some here that I am going to address that are optional, and I'll let you know which ones are optional. And then there are quite a few other settings that aren't used as often or are rather nuanced, and I might just skip those altogether to save some time and make sure we address the fundamentals here. Also, from this page, we are primarily building a task, as the header would imply. And again, a task is a job that you must perform in the system. You have to do something or another, and then physically click approve or reject. A notification, on the other hand, is simply like an email to let you know that something is expiring or renewing or some other action has happened, something else has happened. And a notification, meanwhile, is simply an email alert to alert you that something has happened or something is going to happen. No action is really necessary. From this page, again, we're building a task, but there is one switch on the page to turn the task into a notification. So stay tuned for that. If you're here to learn about notifications, we're going to get to it in a little bit. But now let's start with assigned to. The first field here, it's very important. Assigned to is the individual assigned to the task. So you can choose specific individuals if you'd like to, and they will receive this task every time. This might make sense for like a VP approval or something like that, right? Where there's one person who is in charge of that. Then there are these more dynamic options near the bottom. I have, say, employee, or the employee's manager, the contract owner, so on and so forth. These are based off of the employee fields that you have in the table that we're working with, in my case, contract details. So you might see different employee fields than what I have here. By the way, these are more dynamic. So for example, if I choose the employee, great, one contract from another might have a different employee assigned. So the task will go to that respective contract's employee. Okay. Then we have auto rotate. Auto rotate is a great feature if you're looking to perform this, but it is used less often. What this will do is allow you to, well, rotate the tasks within a group for a more even distribution of workload. So a good example of this is I can maybe choose the finance review group. This is a role-in group I've set up already. And then whenever the tasks fire, let's say I have two people in the finance review group, it'll rotate between finance reviewer 1, finance reviewer 2, finance reviewer 1, finance reviewer 2. Okay. So you could set these up to rotate your tasks. We did cover employee roles and groups in Unit 2, so check out that video in Unit 2 if you're interested. And you can also click this shortcut right here to take you to the roles and groups where you could set them up. Then I have another setting called employee roles and groups, and this is used to bulk send a task, or more commonly, a notification. So if I choose a group here, we'll go with the legal reviewers. It would send the task to the entire group. The way this will work is everyone will be notified, but only one person in that group would need to complete the task, and they'd sort of be completing that task for everyone, for all of the legal reviewers. If you use this feature for a notification, everyone would receive the notification, which I think is a bit more common. So in this case, if I set up a notification about an upcoming contract expiration, the entire legal review team will be notified of that contract expiring. So this is used fairly often. Next, we have the task name. This is the friendly name for the task that you'll see on the contract, on the record, on the email you'll receive. So something short and sweet and directive here is usually best. So in my case, I'll type in like prepare for review. You could do legal review, finance review, send for signature, something like that, but usually something short and sweet. Not to be confused with the title that we covered earlier over in name and options, which use that naming convention that we talked about. That's more for like administrators to manage the workflow list. This is a bit more of a day-to-day task name. Okay, not really the name of the workflow. Then we have the task note and description. These are effectively the instructions for the task. I recommend being clear, adding a nice detailed description if you can, and hopefully even saying what approve and reject would mean. Hey, when you should approve the task, when you should reject the task. I'll skip adding one for now, but just keep that in mind. It definitely helps be nice and clear. And this is a rich text editor too, so feel free to bold, underline, add color, things like that. I want to be very clear about what your users should be doing with these tasks. Next, we have the start date and the end date. We've already sort of addressed the start date back when we addressed conditions, but these are the time condition when you are triggering a workflow. And so usually for an approval process, we'll set it up like this, where it's a certain number of days, usually 0 for an approval process, before or after. It doesn't really matter for an approval process. We set it to 0 days before or after is the same. And then choose a date as a reference point. These will be your date fields that you have in this table in the system. But for an approval process, the most commonly used option is date updated. So in this case, it will fire 0 days before date updated, which will be pretty much instantaneous. And by the way, I should mention that date updated is used because practically everything counts as a date update. If you add a record to the system, the date entered and the date updated will be the same time and date. If you edit the record, that will reflect in the date updated. If you upload a file, that will update the date updated. You complete a task, it updates the date updated. So basically, any action, any change on the record will trigger the date updated to update. And then therefore, if the conditions are met from that update, it will happen immediately. Now, moving to task end date, I'm just going to say how long the task will be, how long they should have to complete this. I'll do 3 days after the date updated in this case. Okay, there we go. They have 3 days to do this now. And by the way, I should acknowledge that workflow tasks don't have to be set up based on the date updated. That's great and probably the best practice for an approval process. But for other types of workflow tasks, you might want to do something like this. So you want to be notified 60 days prior to the contract's expiration. Easy enough, just do 60 days before the expiration date. And by the way, I'm using a Control F here. I find that quite easy to look through these lists. There we go. Expiration date, 60 days before the expiration date will trigger this task. I'd probably update the task end date as well, but we'll skip that for now. And I'll just set this back to date updated. Moving down the page, we're going to head to non-working days. This is an optional feature, but I think it's a good one. This will effectively adjust the end date of the task around holidays and weekends. So if something was going to fall on a holiday like Christmas or something, or on a Sunday, it will adjust it. There are 3 adjustment options here. We can extend to the next working day. So if something were to fall on a Sunday, now it falls on Monday. Curtail to previous workday. If something would fall on a Sunday, now it falls on Friday. And then extend for each non-working day. So if something were to have fallen on a Sunday, now it falls on a Tuesday, because it extends for Saturday and Sunday, 2 non-working days, so now it extends for 2 days. You need to select your non-working days elsewhere in the system, but we'll cover that in a later video. Next, we have notification. Every workflow task sends you a notification, an email in your inbox to alert you that you have a new workflow task assigned to you. It sends a certain number of days before the task end date. And the most common practice here is to receive this notification on the start date of the workflow. So if it's a 3-day long task, I'll put in a 3 right there. Right, so 3 days before the end date is the start date. Therefore, we are going to be receiving this workflow notice on the start date. That's usually what we want. Just one more example to reinforce the point. If it's 5 days long, we'll put in a 5 here. 5 minus 5 is 0. Great, so we receive this workflow on the start date. Theoretically, you could set this to be like 1 as an example. And then instead of receiving the email notice on the start date of the workflow, you'd receive it as more of a reminder a day before the end date. Next, another optional feature is notification template. Every workflow sends you a canned email with contract information, task information, and links back to the record. Every workflow email does have the information about that contract and that workflow, but even so, it's a standard canned email. We are able to, however, create notification templates elsewhere in the system and then apply them here. So we can have different language, different fields, really tailor those workflow emails. I have a few set up myself, so if I want to, I can say, okay, here's my renewal reminder notification template. Again, we're going to address these in a later video in Unit 3. For now, I'll leave this on the default template. The default template is usually quite good. Most folks really like this in my experience, but you do have the option to tailor these. Next, another optional feature is Escalate To. Escalate To will send a notice to another employee if the task has not been completed. So you could choose a specific employee from the drop-down list, or choose from the employee or the employee's manager, and they'll receive this email on the due date or a day after or 2 days after or whatever else you want. They'll be notified if the task has not been completed. Sometimes you could even do something like this, where if the employee assigned is like a specific employee like this, and not like those dynamic options at the bottom, you could assign the escalation to the same employee, and therefore this would serve as like a reminder. So this is like the one extra reminder that you could set up with workflow tasks. And again, this could maybe go to the person assigned, or it could escalate to like their manager or a peer or whoever else you'd like. Skipping down a few settings now, we're going to head to autocomplete. Autocomplete is the setting that changes this task to a notification. It still sends the task, but it auto-completes it upon sending, so it is effectively just a notification. I should also mention that formally speaking, this feature is called an auto-completing workflow, but for practical purposes and for training, I usually just refer to this as a notification. Kind of colloquially, I think that's how we refer to it, but formally it's an auto-completing workflow. You'll also notice that there is an autocomplete option. If you want this to be a notification, just leave this on after notification, which is the default. But there are some other nuanced reasons that we could choose on task end date or without notification instead. Okay, but for notification purposes, which is by far the most common use of this feature, just put autocomplete to yes, and then leave the autocomplete option on after notification. Moving down, I want to click Save Task. You'll see the task added to the task list above. Click that Edit button. And there are a few settings added below now. These last two settings are only available when you save and edit the task. The first of which is very important. We have field updates. If you watched the walkthrough of workflow a few videos back, you would have seen that when I complete one workflow task, it updated the status of the contract. That was thanks to a field update. And you'll probably want to set these up yourself if you're setting up an approval process. Click Add Update. We're going to start by choosing when the task result is something. For approvals, you're going to choose Task Complete. Okay, the standard out-of-the-box approval, like approve, yes, completed on a workflow is called Task Complete. So choose that. You're going to update a certain field. Most commonly, it's the status field. There's no rule saying you can't do other fields. Obviously, you could do all of the fields. You'll see that here. But for standard approval process builds, you're going to update the status field. And then you're going to update the status field to a certain value of that field. In my case, it's going to be legal review. It could be anything you want, though, of course, but I'll choose legal review. I'll click Update. And there we go. Whenever this task is completed, it will update the status of the contract to legal review. Now, this is so important because it is going to trigger the next task in the process, right? The next task in the process will have a condition that says the status must equal legal review. We'll exhibit that in the next video to show how you would connect task 1 and task 2 together, but that's the moral of the story. Field updates from this task will trigger the conditions of the next task. That's how we connect tasks together. It's all about field updates and conditions. I should also mention that I could do a similar thing for maybe like reject. So if I do reject the task, what happens? Well, it's really up to me. I can say, hey, when the task result is rejected, I'm going to update something. I mean, probably the status field again with a certain value. Okay. And then you're going to update this with a certain value of status. I'll just do rejected in this case, just as an example. We'll make it very simple. It will simply just stop the workflow. But you could set up another workflow task that has a condition that says, hey, whenever the status equals rejected, maybe escalate to the contract owner or to the employee assigned or to something like that, right? So this field update, when you click reject, will just change the status to rejected. But that change might trigger another workflow. So basically, I'm already starting to kind of build out two paths. Here's an approval path, and here's a rejection path. And what these do will really be based on whatever the next workflows are in the process. We'll clarify a little bit more in the next video. The final setting on this page is optional. We have document authoring templates. This will make a lot more sense if you already watched the videos on document templates, but effectively what this will do is allow you to auto-merge a template and attach that new file to the record. Ordinarily, merging a template takes a few clicks on a record, but this will automate that. So I'll say, hey, whenever the workflow is created or completed, in my case, I chose created, apply a certain template, go with our NDA template, and I could choose to attach that file. Most folks should attach the file. Unless you're using e-approvals in your system, you might not want to do this, but for the most part, I would just attach the file, click update, and you're good to go. Make sure you click save task at the bottom, and you're all set. So that is how you create a task in Cobblestone Contract Insight, a workflow task, and we also covered how to set up a notification. In the next video, we'll do a quick walkthrough of how to connect one task to the next, and then we'll wrap up this section by talking about alerts. Thank you.